basically, we wanted to spend this hour giving some updates of what's going on in the region as far as adaptation, decision-making, and collaborations. We had a staff retreat for the North Central CSC along with the Western Water Assessment and the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub last Thursday and Friday. And so a lot of what we'll be presenting today, we talked about at the retreat. Let's see. And just so everyone doesn't have to listen to me for an hour, I've delegated a lot of the topics out to other folks to talk about. So we will run through them. I do have a PowerPoint. Some people are using slides, some aren't, but I thought it would just help us make sure we don't miss anything. So let's get started. I put Shelley.
Oh, can you click on that?
Okay, there we go. So Shelley Crosby's up first, and she's going to be talking about ecological drought on the SNAP project.
Hi, everyone. This is Shelley, and I'll just give you a brief update on our Science for Nature and People Partnership working group that's focused on the ecological impacts of drought. So we are almost 20-strong working group of social scientists and natural scientists. And Jill, if you want to go to the next slide. We're trying to set up a framework that sort of describes ecological drought, and we're using a vulnerability framework for this. So that top box sort of talks about all of our elements of exposure during drought. So drought, anthropogenic climate change, mostly which makes warmer droughts, hotter droughts, landscape characteristics, as well as this human land and water use together we see as the exposure element. And just to back up a little bit, the yellow colors represent natural processes, and the blue colors represent more human modified processes. So then further down for our sensitivity box, we're considering various ecological characteristics that are inherent in the system, as well as the ecosystem management that humans are doing, either purposely or inadvertently, to ecosystems. And once you cross that threshold of vulnerability, you see an impact on the ground, a really persistent, widespread ecological impact, such as widespread tree mortality, which would then lead to ecosystem service impacts and just have cascading effects throughout that system. So if you go to the next slide, Jill. In addition to some of the modeling we're trying to do around that, we have some pretty specific social science pieces, and I'll just run through them one by one in the next few slides. You want to go to the next one, Jill?
Yeah.
Sorry. So first of all, we're focused quite heavily on ecosystem services, and we have two economists on our team, Nejam Rahim and Steve Colt. And so we're trying to use a framework of valuing natural capital to try and put a price tag on the ecosystem services that will be impacted with drought-induced ecological impacts. And we're hoping that if we can really understand these ecosystem services better, we have a stronger link to policy changes related to them. So next slide, Jill. We're also focused on something that the Nature Conservancy especially calls nature-based techniques. So this is basically ecosystem management with the primary goal of helping people. So at the end of the day, these techniques, such as building rock dams, are going to benefit both nature and people. And often they're used in lieu of these more traditional infrastructure techniques to prevent some kind of harm to ecosystems. So we're focused on sort of researching the efficacy of these things and trying to get them more on people's radar as things they could use. And then the next slide, Deb Badke and Amanda Craven are leading a subgroup to focus on a synthesis of drought plans across each state. And we just have a simple question: how do they take ecological risks from drought into account? Do they or do they not? Are there potential harms or benefits for ecosystems in their current drought plans? We're excited about this. We think it's highly relevant right now because many states in the U.S. are developing drought plans now. And so we're seeing this as an opportunity to identify, can we consider ecological risks or nature-based strategies in the drought plans. And then finally, the last slide, we're working closely with, in the Upper Missouri Headwaters Basin, there's a demonstration project that's part of the National Drought Resilience Partnership. And so we're working at the headwaters there, the Missouri River in southwestern Montana. And this Upper Missouri Headwaters Basin group is a team of, over 100 different stakeholders, and their goals that they have determined are to provide tools for drought monitoring, assessing, and forecasting, to develop local and regional capacity to prepare for drought, and then to implement projects on local and regional scales that they hope will build drought resilience. So we're coming into this group to help them think about ecological impacts in particular, and they are working with us. Their questions toward us are about how can we help them identify vulnerabilities and impacts, and perhaps come up with a bit of an early warning system for the area. So that pretty much sums it up, all those social aspects of this SNAP Ecological Drought Working Group.
Thanks, Shelley. I believe Shelley is going to be leading this meeting, so if anyone has questions for her, they might want to jump in now.
And hi, guys. This is Molly Cross. I just joined a little bit late, so if folks do have questions that come up later on, I can also answer any questions about the SNAP work.
Great. Thanks, Molly.
Thanks, Molly.
Nice job, Shelley.
Thanks.
Okay, then I guess we'll move on to the next topic. And that is Amanda Craven wasn't able to join us today, but Rudy and Nina are going to give an update on her project about decision tools for drought and water resources.
Hi, this is Nina Burkhardt. I'm sitting with Rudy, and Amanda's out of town this week, so we're going to give a bit of an overview of her project, and we may be able to field some questions, and if we cannot field questions, we can direct them to her when she returns. So I think probably most of you know that Amanda is working with us as a Mendenhall Fellow, as a social scientist here at the Fort Collins Science Center. And so the title of her project is Selecting Decision Support for Climate Adaptation, Why Drought Decision Makers Choose to Use Tools or Not. And so what she's interested in is she's interested in looking at decision support tools because they've been shown, of course, to be a really powerful means to facilitate collaborative learning and reach widely acceptable decisions. And so, but she also noted, and others have noted, that decision support tools have their limitations. Their effectiveness can be really influenced by the social and institutional context in which they're created and implemented. Users may have expectations about long-term access to a tool, even when people only design it for a specific time or a specific purpose, and so forth. So there's some limitations with tools. And so, but, in Amanda's research, she determined that these factors that might constrain tool usability are fairly poorly understood, since there have been some single case examinations of some decision support tools, but not anything that tried to look more broadly at tools in a variety of contexts. So her interest then is to examine this question about why managers choose to use or not use decision support tools in the first place. And she is looking at both tool creators and potential tool users. So she wants to really understand the perspectives of tool creators. Why are they creating tools? What purpose do they hope that they'll serve? What are the assumptions? What are the potential applications? And then also looking at tool users to see how they're deciding to adopt tools and how they're using them. So she is looking specifically at the Upper Colorado River Basin, and she's looking at tools used for drought decision-making. And, okay, so she's working on that. And I'm going to turn the page here. And so these are basically her research questions. So what tools are available? How do tool creators and information providers choose which tools to produce? To what extent and by what means are tools being co-created with users? So that's question number one. Her second research question is, what roles do the different types of decision support tools play in drought decision-making for different users? Third question, how do managers find out about decision support tools? How do these channels match or not match the ways tool creators promote their tools? And then finally, how do managers choose to use or not use available decision support tools? And so to get at the answers to these questions, Amanda is combining document analysis with interviews. And so she has she's identified people who she intends to interview, and they are people who are with federal agencies, the state engineer's office, water conservancy districts, so forth, and really wants to talk to a variety of people who might be making decisions about using these tools to figure out, how they make their decisions and what factors are important in those. And she is partnering on this with Western Water Assessment. Western Water Assessment got funding for a NOAA SARP project on drought early warning in the upper Colorado River Basin. And they, in conversation, determined that they had some complementary interests. So they'll be working together through some of this and sharing data and information with each other. And I think that's about what I was going to say about this, but I'm really happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Hi, this is Cody Knutson, the Drought Center. I was wondering, did you say she was focused on the Colorado Basin then, or is it just Colorado?
No, the upper Colorado, and she's focusing on a couple of the water divisions. I'm trying to look on her plan here and see, but it's the upper Colorado Basin.
Okay.
And let me see. She's specifically interested in water divisions 4, 5, and 7. And she's figuring that she'll probably do about 40 interviews in those basins.
But Cody, the START project, Lisa Dilling's project, is beyond just Colorado. It's, Western Water Assessment is the Colorado, Wyoming, Utah states of the upper Colorado. So it's the west slope of Colorado, but then goes into Utah and Wyoming. But I guess it sounds like Amanda's just focusing on the Colorado piece.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Obviously trying to keep it bound and doable within a reasonable
time.
I
could see how that one could grow pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It could get out of hand pretty quickly if it got too big on that one.
Right, because, you have obviously the sprawling number of potential actors or stakeholders, and then at the same time trying to define the list of, decision support tools that could be under that could be under consideration. It all of a sudden becomes a pretty daunting matrix, so to speak, of potential people and potential tools.
Okay, thanks, Nina. Appreciate you stepping in for Amanda.
Sure. Happy to do it.
Okay. So Dennis, you're up next. Some words on the NCA and the sustained assessment effort.
So a number of you know that with the National Climate Assessment, that the current thinking is really looking at sort of a sustained assessment built upon research efforts and findings in the sort of interim years and trying to have this as an ongoing process. And so we had a discussion last week at our cross-regional center retreat, thinking about how the North Central Climate Science Center, the USDA Hub, and the Western Water Assessment can start looking at various activities and products and get them sort of shaped up to be incorporated within sort of the national assessment efforts, understanding that there's still some uncertainty exactly what the shape and form of the next assessment product will be. Will it be a series of sectoral, sort of what we saw in the 2013-2014 effort, where it's a volume of chapters on sectors and regions, or something that's sort of more web-based, more useful at various scales of interest, from local to state level to national level efforts. So anticipating some of the needs, and sort of also sort of using sort of a no regrets sort of type of effort, where what products we would produce would be useful for our own sort of clientele or end user community that we're working with, especially in this area of adaptation efforts, and we have sort of gleaning lessons learned, looking at synthesis activities, those sorts of things, and start thinking now of how we might pull this together. And some of this is sort of also, in the way that we're trying to frame the workshop in late August, early September. We'll get into more details of what are these products going to look like, and can we produce them in a timely fashion, and Jill will talk about that later. So those are the type of discussions that we're starting up for the Climate Science Center, as well as sort of across the region with our various partners. And one thing that Lisa Dilling presented, and actually I may ask Bill Travis to sort of enlarge on this topic, because I think he knows a little bit more about from the Western Water perspective. There's an opportunity of developing a cross-regional sort of synthesis of products for the sustained assessment. They'll be actually hiring a postdoc for next for a sort of 24-month term to look at lessons learned. And so, are there people that we know that we might want to nominate or put in as a candidate for this effort? And Lisa was also asking for sort of across our region, are there case studies or examples that we might want to incorporate into the study, although the initial thrust of her study will be sort of in the Southwest, more domain, sort of the Colorado River domain, and things that deal with sort of the Southwest and part of the North Central of activities, but not focused only on the North Central. So those are a couple of things that just for us to keep in mind in how we might move forward. I might ask Bill to elaborate on some of this, or correct me where I was wrong on some of this, because you've been involved with some of the sustained assessment, and I think those websites and URLs that you provided us last week, I think, Jill, that's something that we can share with this group as well, because I think that would be informative as well, if Bill agrees to that.
Hey, this is Bill Travis. How's my sound?
Great.
Did someone say okay?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, Dennis. So NOAA has provided some resources to actually 4 of the RESAs: Pacific, the Urban Northeast, the Southeast, South Central, and the Southwest, or the Joint Southwestern Western Water and CNAP, California Nevada Applications Project, to hire sustained assessment specialist for a couple of years. So among our many obligations are to coordinate or start joining across the whole nation, from the Northeast to the Southwest. But it's still a little vague. There's a point on Dennis's slide there, the ultimate goal moving from a discrete report writing event to a more ongoing process, which was out of the sustained assessment report that the NACADAT wrote right near the end, or maybe perhaps in the middle of the previous assessment. We're seeing it more as pathfinding for what ought to go on in if you will, continuous national assessment, such as looking at attribution issues, risk, adaptation. We're also thinking of one of the first goals of our post here would be what Dennis was just describing, working in our region, and we include our region to be the cooperative region that we have with North Central and the hub as well, for cases that show what has bubbled up before and after the last national assessment that could inform the next assessment. They also want to decide whether we don't have an ad yet for this post, so we've got a few more some wordsmithing to do. But I do think that we wouldn't be asking the person to do climate assessment as more a meta-analysis of what's happening in climate assessment. How's that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. That helps clarify some of the points I was trying to make.
Yeah, and we want them to be here in Boulder, but there's a fair amount of travel involved just to coordinate within the region, but also with the other RESAs. And I guess I want to warn everybody, we all are thinking about this. It's not, we haven't been told really what the next national assessment will look like, as Dennis was alluding to. You may recall that the NCA3 was fairly traditional. It was IPCC-like pile a bunch of authors on. The Southwest, which we were involved in, wrote an entire book. The state of the science, the state of impacts, the state of adaptation, and vulnerability. We're hearing that it might look significantly different than that, but we don't know yet.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Well, that was good segue, because I have also Bill up next for some more updates out of Boulder and the Western Water Assessment. Want to give some information to this group about EarthLab and the modeler you're looking for Project Extremes and your new Economist hire.
Sure. So Western Water has a new partner on campus called EarthLab. The university decided to make some internal investments to improve its Earth systems analytics capability. It argued, the administration argued that, gee, we really have a very strong space focus, meaning like satellites and things like that, and astronautics, that it wanted to see that space focus and Earth science focus built on and united. So a few of us wrote a proposal arguing that we would make better use of observations from all platforms of Earth systems if we had greater analytics capability, and by that I mean soft hardware and the personnel invested to work with especially big data. So I hate to use that phrase, but this is a big data project. And we would propose to pursue a set of questions on Earth system change in the next 2 years, and we're standing that up right now. It's directed by an ecologist, Jennifer Balch, a biogeographer who works in forest and fire, especially in the tropics, but now in the western U.S. Another project was funded at the same time. I'll say a little bit more about EarthLab in a second. IRIS, Integrated Remote and In Situ Sensing Program. Their argument was that, and that's mostly a group of engineers, to make the link, the data link, the sensing link and the data link between sensing platforms and usable Earth science data. And one argument they made was that a new platform, relatively new, drones, needed to be worked into the systems more, and their first couple of years are going to be working in flying drones. They're actually flying drones up by where we were meeting last week in support of one of the Earth Lab's science projects. Okay, now science projects, Earth Lab has 3 units. We're building an analytics hub capability, which has both physical space, software, and people. The idea was to have a team dedicated to helping scientists who want to use big data in high-performance computing to ask Earth system science questions. You think we might be in pretty good shape here at Boulder's campus doing that, but we're not. So we have data visualization, data management, and statistics and modeling team now on board. The space to do that and the equipment to do it in service to a set of science projects. I'll briefly mention them. There's a permafrost project whose goal is to create a map of global permafrost and its behavior over the next century, which doesn't exist now. A fire project in a similar goal. These are, you might represent, you'd recognize these as sort of grand challenge questions on forest fire or all types of natural fire. A forest change project. A mass erosion project, mass wasting at different scales. The mass wasting group is the Earth System Modelers geologist, especially interested in across timescales from landslides to glacial erosion and working along that whole temporal continuum. And a spatial data harmonization effort. And last but not least, my project, which is a risk and hazards. And the risk and hazards, because the 3 centers, North Central, the Hub, and Western Water, had already hatched an idea to work in some aspects of drought decision-making by ranchers. I put that up as a first project, and that's what we'll be pursuing. So some of you who go to those retreats already know about that, and I'll be happy to talk about it. I talked a little bit about it on our webinar in the fall. And each of the projects has a faculty member, but also has hired or is hiring a postdoc. And the risk and hazard postdoc is Tricia Schrum. She just defended her dissertation at Harvard. She's an economist, an experimental economist who works especially in game theory and decision making. Most of her work has been on energy decisions at the household level. So I think it's going to be really neat. She's really excited to think about individual decision makers like farmers and ranchers, and we're interested in running experiments in the Analytics Hub and perhaps also in the RAM up in Fort Collins that would include producers actually trying to make decisions under drought conditions and varying market conditions, and last but not least, bringing in the new programs that RMA has started on index or rainfall index and range insurance. So I think we'll be working in insurance decision-making and risk all associated with drought for the next 2 years. Last but not least, the project was hatched on coupled natural human systems with a focus on extreme events and thresholds, and we weren't able to fill that post. So we're meeting this week to rewrite the ad. We would love to hire immediately a postdoc who has an interest either from the social or the natural or both, that would fit your kind of typical natural, social natural system, coupled systems approach, but also with an extremes focus, and we could make that hire right away, and I'll send the ad. Jill asked for it. It's just not wordsmithed yet, but it won't be any different than what you've just heard. Pretty typical 2-year postdoc. I think our salary ranges for a brand new postdoc is like $60,000, and it works up a little more for those who are out for a few years. That's all I'll say right now, I think. Not only do I think, I know that's all I'll say right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give some updates from what's going on at the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub. They have recently hired a new fellow. Haley is a PhD candidate in here at CSU in the Department of Forest and Rangeland Stewardship. And she has been charged with adapting the Adaptation Handbook for Forests, which was created in the Midwest for rangelands in our region. She's working, this is going to be a bottom-up, stakeholder-driven approach. She will be starting conducting interviews with ranchers and land managers as she begins this project. And she says she doesn't know how much of this handbook that she can kind of keep and adapt, or how much is going to have to be created from scratch, but I guess she'll be working on that shortly. They also, earlier this spring, have held a series of climate and agricultural tools workshops, and the purpose of these was to enhance and build partnerships between the regional climate and agricultural services communities. They have additional workshops scheduled, and one of the things that Wendy stressed that came out of the first workshop is the need for stakeholder engagement training. A lot of the extension agents, et cetera, that she was working with expressed the need to have some training on stakeholder engagement. So if you want more information about this, you can contact me, and I'll pass it along to Justin and Wendy. I don't have the dates for the upcoming workshop, but I think they'll be coming up, I believe, this fall, I think. So, yeah, anyway. So that's the update from the Climate Hub. Okay. All right, Shannon, I have you up now next for the Drought Response manuscript first.
Okay, so I was asked to talk about a whole bunch of different projects in a really short amount of time, so this is going to be pretty whirlwind and very thumbnail. So the three-center retreat that's been mentioned between the North Central Climate Science Center, the USDA High Plains Climate Hub, Regional Climate Hub, and the Western Water Assessment NOAA has a drought sort of breakout working group that has come out of that to look at what all of the respective centers are doing on drought. And one of the activities, or kind of the main activity that we landed on, at least as a start, is to write a collaborative paper together. And so we are looking at drought planning and drought planning in the context of climate change adaptation planning, and where kind of the differences between those lie, as well as the synergies, and where one or the other might cause maladaptations, where trade-offs are, and then looking kind of across the different sectors that our respective centers focus on. So the Western Water Assessment being more kind of largely municipal, sort of urban focused, although not solely, but more in the kind of water manager realm. The North Central Climate Science Center being more in the kind of natural resource management, fish and wildlife, sort of conservation realm, and then the USDA hub, of course, being more agriculture, and especially a lot of ranching in our overlapping region. So that's all I'll say about that. So if you want to move on to the next one. So I was asked to talk about some of the tribal activities and updates on those activities. The Wind River Reservation project has a lot of aspects to it and a lot of partners. My co-lead's on the phone right now, Cody Knudsen, on the technical assessment and planning activities. That project essentially has sort of three legs to it. One is, as I mentioned, the technical assessment, looking at risk and vulnerabilities at Wind River Reservation. The other being, the second being capacity building, so looking at monitoring the development of the climate and drought summary that I think pretty much everyone on the call has seen at one point or another. And then the third being the drought planning activity. One of the things, a couple things we're working on right now is, one is we're doing, so that project has kind of three teams for assessment on the three different sort of disciplinary areas of the center, so to speak. So there's a social science team that Cody and I lead. There's a ecosystems impacts team that Jennifer Wellman, who's there at the reservation, leads, and then there's the physical climate team that Imtiaz Rangwala and Mark Svoboda from the National Drought Mitigation Center lead. We're all working together to write a collaborative paper looking at what happened in the last irrigation season and water year. So in other words, the 2015 year, when there was a real-world scenario at the reservation where they ran out of irrigation water at the end of the year in one of the basins on the reservation, and we're doing sort of a retrospective looking at that year in the context of other drought years, which 2015 wasn't really a drought year, but they did have what we're calling kind of a micro-drought at the reservation for a combination of physical climate along with infrastructure and management issues. So we're working on that paper together. And then right now we're in the process of planning a workshop in July at the reservation with the managers there. This is, gosh, Cody, help me remember. This is like our 4th or 5th workshop, I think, with managers there. And that's going to be a workshop that basically focuses on all of these different aspects of the project. And because this is a really, co-produced project, an iterative project, we're basically going to be working with the managers to talk to them about our work to date, get their feedback, talk about what their needs are, next steps, so on and so forth. So Cody, I don't know if you wanted to chime in with any comments about that I skipped over, but like I said, I'm just trying to do a real thumbnail version.
No, I think that was a good overview. Thanks, Shannon.
Okay, great. So let's see, the Mountain Ute project, I think most people know that I am working with them on doing their own tribal vulnerability assessment. We applied for a BIA grant for that project, and the money is at the tribe, but I am still waiting for that project to get up and running. There's been some difficulties on their end. They're hiring a local tribal climate change coordinator. There's been some challenges getting that person in place. So until that person's in place, we can't start. So that one's kind of in a holding pattern. One of the other upcoming tribal activities of interest is I'm working with ITEP, the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. They're doing, probably most of you know, they do climate change workshops with tribes all over the country, and they're doing one in August in Billings, Montana for the tribes in Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, and North Dakota. That's a climate adaptation planning workshop. It's a 3-day workshop. I've been asked to give a talk on climate change in the region and impacts on tribal lands in the region. And then we are also going to, they have case study sessions as part of that workshop, and we're going to do the Wind River Project as one of the case studies for that workshop. So I've already talked to the tribal water engineer at Wind River, and he's on board to do that. So we're going to get someone, so Cody, you should know about that. This just developed in the last few days. We're going to get Mitch or someone from the project to come up and probably co-present with me at that workshop. So that should be pretty cool. Let's see, getting ready for the Rising Voices 4 conference. So that's the Indigenous Peoples and Climate Change Conference that has typically happened in Boulder at NCAR for the past 3 years. The upcoming one is going to be in Hawaii in July. So I'm going to be going to represent the center on that workshop. And just last but not least, I guess I'll just mention that, as far as sort of our broader tribal engagement plan, we are still waiting to hear from BIA on the BIA-sponsored tribal liaison position. So still don't know anything about that, still not sure when that person's coming, anxiously awaiting. So that's it for tribes for now, Jill, if you want to move on. So the BLM Social Vulnerability Assessment, again, I think most of you already know, we're partnering with Western State University, Corey Knapp's my co-PI on that project, and the BLM to work with them to look at vulnerability of basically livelihoods and users of public lands, BLM lands in particular, throughout the state. We've got 2 case studies as part of that assessment. One is a Little Snake Field Office in Northwest Colorado. The other is in the Gunnison Basin. We might have other cases at some point, but right now those are the two cases that we're focusing on. We're also doing some statewide looking at trying to figure out indicators and do some indicator mapping, which is exceedingly challenging, as Trevor will attest to. So we're working on doing the sort of wrapping up of the first report on those initial case studies. We've got a paper that is we're doing revisions on now that we submitted to a journal about the approach that we're taking for this paper. And then we're still, you know, as we develop the report, work more closely with BLM to get feedback, we're looking at then what activities to do in, to continue in 2016 and what new activities we might do in 16-17. We're looking at in 2017 working with the Colorado Natural Heritage Program to do some kind of a synthesis activity because they already completed their ecosystems vulnerability assessment for the state of Colorado. You can find that on our link to our website if you don't know about it or haven't seen it yet. So we're going to be figuring out in 2017 how to take the knowledge learned from these two separate assessments, one focusing on the humans, the other focusing on species and habitat, and figure out what lessons from those reports we can use to work with managers for them developing their own adaptation strategies and plans. So that's it for that one, if you want to move on. Hello?
Sorry, I was talking on mute. Any updates from the National Adaptation Forum?
Yeah, I thought you were going to flip aside. I'll just talk about that. So the National Adaptation Forum, I think most people know about it, but if not, this will be the third National Adaptation Forum. It happens every 2 years. The next National Adaptation Forum is going to be in St. Paul, Minnesota in May of 2017. And I am on the steering committee for the National Adaptation Forum for this one. And basically, you know, I'll just continue to update this group and our other, you know, check-ins with our PIs on what's happening with the National Adaptation Forum. It's really just starting to spin up for the planning for 2017. One date of note to keep your eye on and maybe put on your calendar is the call for proposals for the National Adaptation Forum will open on August 8th. So keep an eye out for that. And I'm hoping we can continue to have a discussion with this group and other groups and projects within the Climate Science Center about proposals that we might be submitting for the upcoming NAF. A couple other things to mention is I'm on a couple of the working groups for the National Adaptation Forum. One is the Equity Working Group. So the National Adaptation Forum is taking very, very seriously building equity into the National Adaptation Forum, and that's going to be one of the criteria that they're going to be looking for in proposals is how do proposals and sessions deal with the issue of equity. Knowing that maybe not every single proposal will have an equity aspect to it, but I encourage people to be thinking about that if they are going to be looking at putting together sessions or anything like that. If you build equity into it, it's going to make your proposal much stronger. The National Adaptation Forum is a competitive process. There will be a whole proposal submission and review, and not all of the proposals get selected. So the Equity Working Group is not only about getting equity into the sessions, but also how to make the forum in general more equitable, so getting more underrepresented groups to the forum, addressing more issues in terms of how the forum is structured and things like that. I personally am advocating for getting more tribal involvement and trying to encourage them to be more proactive about engaging the tribes in Minnesota and in the region to invite them to be part of the forum. So I will continue to work on that angle. I'm also on the Natural Resources Management Working Group for the National Adaptation Forum. That group hasn't started talking yet, so I'm not exactly sure what we're doing for that. And there will be an ongoing series of webinars, so keep an eye out for those. And also if you're on Twitter, it's hashtag NAF2017, and I'll always be posting updates about the forum there as well. So I think that's it for my updates.
Thanks, Shannon. Okay, Brian.
Sure.
All right, Brian Miller is going to be giving us an update on the scenario planning project with the National Park Service.
All right, and Jill's just transferring over to me. I'm going to throw up a few slides that I had. Figured to provide some visuals while we're chatting here, some pictures, if nothing else. All right, so should be up there. There we go. So this project is being led by Amy Simstead with USGS, but we have a number of collaborators from different institutions, as you can see here. And actually, I should say a thank you to Molly Cross. She is not listed here as part of the project team, but did step in to help out with some of our scenario planning work. So thanks to her as well. So we're working in two specific study sites within the Northern Great Plains ecoregion, shown by the red circles or orange circles there. And these are centered on National Park Service units, the north being Knife River Indian Villages Historic Site, and the south being Badlands National Park. But I will say that we intentionally wanted to broaden this sort of project beyond the boundaries of the parks themselves. So working with Forest Service, tribal, and Fish and Wildlife Service lands adjacent to and near those parks. The main focus of this project is using scenario planning to assist with climate change adaptation. And so scenario planning, for those that aren't familiar, is sort of a general framework to support decision-making when there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of sort of uncontrollable factors, as is the case with climate change. And the idea here is to not necessarily use an approach of trying to predict what might happen or even assigning some probability to possible futures, but rather to say what are what's the range of plausible future conditions we might be facing, and how can we adjust or modify our planning efforts or management actions in order to meet those futures and still achieve our goals. But that being said, the idea behind this project was to then add a couple of components to that scenario planning process, one being additional sort of regional and also local climate summaries, and then sort of on the back end of the scenario planning effort, adding on some quantitative modeling in order to kind of support the more qualitative in-person scenario planning workshops. So first, this has been an iterative process throughout between the research team and the management participants. And for the two sites, it started off by just having orientation meetings and identifying some of the key management issues that were really sort of prominent at each site. So for North Dakota, really a lot of concerns around archaeological resources, riparian ecosystems, and upland grasslands. And then in South Dakota, around Badlands, concerns with erosion and how that relates to paleontological and archaeological resources, grasslands, and also grazing availability for bison and livestock. And so, if we kind of look at these different management issues and then think about how climate as it changes into the future might affect them, this can be a really daunting task. And, one way to kind of, I think, to start to get a handle on that is just to look at a scatter plot of different GCMs. And here we're just showing two axes, one precipitation, one is temperature, to show you kind of the spread of projected changes in intent from precipitation. This is for our South Dakota site. And so the first step really then is to can we reduce this down into sort of a set of challenging, divergent, plausible, and relevant scenarios to think through and how that relates to management. And we've chosen 4. And here it looks like we're not really capturing the spread in the climate models, and that's because we're actually, because of the management concerns related to grazing and erosion, we actually were looking at more than just annual precip and annual temperature and thinking about the spread of these models in terms of things like the start of spring and spring precipitation and heavy rain events. But so our first job was to take these global climate models and then to summarize them in ways that were useful for people within a workshop setting. And so this took a bunch of different forms, from things like with tables, where we really had some more quantitative information, to sort of down here on the lower left, more bulleted kind of descriptions of each of these climate scenarios, to even just charts with tables with arrows indicating the direction and magnitude of change, to comparisons with historical analogs. So providing people in the workshops with a variety of different kinds of information for each of these climate scenarios. And the idea behind that then was to say, okay, well, once we've kind of collectively wrapped our heads around these different climate futures, let's think through what the implications of those scenarios might be for people's resources of concern, and then to say, okay, well, here's how we expect things might change under those futures, and then, well, here's what we might need to do to either our current actions or our current goals. Do we need to revise either of those things in order to sort of be successful under these different climate futures? So this was all done through in-person workshops at both sites. And I'll just say that briefly, sort of what we've done as a follow-on, especially for the South Dakota site, is some quantitative modeling work here, particularly looking at grassland vegetation. And that's some of the work that I'm focusing on, is using state and transition simulation models to then go back and say, okay, well, what are we seeing on the simulation side of things? If we try and simulate our current vegetation under these different climate futures and under the management options that people described in the workshops, what are some of the similarities we're seeing with the qualitative sort of thinking in person, and what are the differences, and where do they kind of match up and where don't they? And so we've done our simulation model, or we've run them, we've taken them back to the management group in South Dakota, and now we're revising the models with their input in order to kind of make them more useful and interesting for them, and then we'll sort of have a final comparison of the qualitative and quantitative scenario planning work. So I think I'll stop there, and that's next, Jill.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
I just have one more slide, actually. Yep. Okay.
I think you might need to share your screen.
Okay.
Or no, yeah, I'm not seeing it.
Okay, sorry, I'm just, I have one more slide, and it's just about announcements, but,
You go to the top. Yeah, hover up there. Or escape even.
Well, I'll just talk about what the announcements are. Okay, the first is, we are holding a face-to-face adaptation workshop. It's going to be Wednesday and Thursday, August 31st and September 1st here at CSU in Fort Collins. Travel funds are available for those who need them, if you let me know. And we're really going to be talking about how we support co-produced research in the region, talk about maybe a potential synthetic product, and also plans for this group in the recompete of the center, which is going to happen next year in 2017. So please let me know if you're interested in attending, and we will be firming up the agenda and sending that out soon. The next is in November, there's going to be a cross-CSC-wide student and early career training. It's going to be in Amherst, Massachusetts. And the themes of this training are broadly actionable science, some professional skills development, a quite long session on co-production of knowledge, and communicating science. Students and postdocs and other early career researchers from each region are going to be invited to go there. We do have travel funds available for this as well. Probably we'll be able to send 4 people from our region to the training. So we'll put out more information about that and come up with a nomination process for people to either self-nominate, or if researchers want to nominate a student or postdoc that they're working with to go, and we'll have spots available for people from our region. The timeline on that, we hope to identify the attendees from our region by the end of July, end of next month. And lastly, we just found out late last week that the NC CSC, along with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the Colorado Natural Heritage Program, received an honorable mention award for the 2016 Climate Adaptation Leadership Award for the work on the revising the State Wildlife Action Plan to include assessment of how key habitat species could be affected by climate change. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. And one last announcement, next month, July 12th, Linda Joyce will be giving the Adaptation Working Group webinar. Let us know what's going on with adaptation planning at the Forest Service. So I know we're just about out of time, but if anyone could stay on for a few minutes, does anyone have questions for any of the speakers today?
Jill, what was the September dates?
Yeah, that is August 31st and September 1st. That's a Wednesday and Thursday.
Yep, great, got it.
Any other questions? Okay, I know that was rapid fire presentation today, but if anyone does want more information about anything, feel free to reach out to the person who presented, or if you don't have the information for them, contact me and I can connect you with whoever you want more information from. So thanks everyone for attending today, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, Jill.
Thanks, Jill.
You have reached 303-530-5010. Please leave a message.